It's a story that defies every assumption about trust in the sailing world, where a handshake and a broker's word were once sacred bonds. What the Coast Guard discovered in the murky waters off Cape Hatteras on that October morning would rewrite everything we thought we knew about yacht sales, human greed, and the deadly consequences of a single, calculated lie. This isn't just another sailing accident. It's a chilling reminder that in the world of luxury yachts, where millions of dollars change hands on promises and paperwork, one man's deception can become another couple's death sentence. In this story, we're going to uncover the shocking truth behind what appeared to be a tragic but routine maritime accident. We'll examine the forged documents, follow the paper trail of lies, and reveal how a respected yacht broker's desperate financial situation led him to orchestrate one of the most callous deceptions in modern sailing history. What you're about to discover will change how you view every yacht transaction, every broker's smile, and every perfect boat that seems too good to be true. This is a lesson that every sailor, every dreamer who's ever looked at a yacht and imagined freedom on the open ocean needs to understand. Because what happened to David and Sarah Mitchell could happen to anyone who places blind trust in the wrong hands. And the price of that trust, as you'll see, can be measured not just in dollars, but in human lives. David Mitchell had always been the careful type. At 54, the former Boeing engineer had spent 3 decades designing aircraft systems where a single miscalculation could mean catastrophe. His methodical nature extended to everything, from the way he organized his garage tools by size and function to the meticulous spreadsheets he maintained, tracking every expense in his household budget. But when it came to his dream of sailing around the world, David Mitchell became a different man entirely. Sarah Mitchell, 48, was David's perfect complement. Where he was methodical, she was intuitive. A former marine biologist who had given up field research to raise their 2 children, Sarah possessed an almost mystical connection to the ocean. She could read weather patterns in cloud formations hours before they appeared on radar, could sense changes in sea conditions by the way waves lapped against a hull. Friends often joked that she had salt water running through her veins instead of blood. For 26 years of marriage, their dream had lived on the refrigerator door, a weathered photograph of a sleek, 60-foot sailing yacht cutting through crystal blue Caribbean waters. The photo had been torn from a sailing magazine during their honeymoon in Key West, and it had survived 3 house moves, countless kitchen renovations, and the daily chaos of raising 2 children. Every morning, as David grabbed his coffee and Sarah packed school lunches, that image reminded them of the life they would someday live. The dream wasn't just about escape, it was about redemption. David had spent his career in windowless offices, designing systems for aircraft he would never pilot. Sarah had traded her passion for marine research for suburban motherhood, watching her expertise grow stale while other scientists published papers about coral reef systems she had once studied firsthand. The sailing dream represented a return to who they had been before mortgages, career pressures, and parental responsibilities had reshaped their identities. By 2019, their sacrifice finally seemed worthwhile. Their son had graduated from engineering school and landed a job with SpaceX. Their daughter was completing her residency at Johns Hopkins. The mortgage was paid off. David's Boeing pension was secure, and Sarah had inherited a modest sum from her parents' estate. After decades of careful financial planning, they had accumulated nearly $800,000 specifically earmarked for their sailing adventure. Enough, according to their research, to buy a quality blue water yacht and fund 3 years of cruising the world's oceans. David approached yacht shopping with the same systematic precision he had applied to aircraft design. He subscribed to every sailing magazine, attended boat shows from Seattle to Fort Lauderdale, and created detailed spreadsheets comparing hull designs, engine specifications, and safety equipment. He completed a Coast Guard auxiliary sailing course, earned his offshore sailing certification, and spent weekends crewing on other people's boats to gain experience with different yacht systems. Sarah, meanwhile, was already living the dream in her imagination. She researched anchorages in remote Pacific atolls, studied tide charts for challenging passages, and learned about weather routing software that could help them avoid storms. She practiced celestial navigation, not because they would need it with modern GPS systems, but because she wanted to connect with the ancient traditions of seafaring. Their research consistently pointed to one conclusion. They needed a yacht between 55 and 65 feet built by a reputable manufacturer with proven blue water capabilities and a track record of successful circumnavigations. The sweet spot, according to every expert they consulted, was a yacht between 10 and 15 years old, new enough to have modern safety equipment and electronics, but old enough to have worked through any initial construction issues. That's when they found Marcus Holloway, a yacht broker whose reputation in the Pacific Northwest sailing community was impeccable. Holloway had been selling yachts for 23 years, had personally sailed across the Pacific twice, and was known for matching clients with boats that perfectly suited their needs and experience levels. His brokerage, Puget Sound Yacht Sales, had offices in Seattle and San Diego, and his client testimonials read like love letters to a trusted family friend. Holloway understood the Mitchells immediately. During their first meeting at his Seattle office overlooking Elliott Bay, he listened to their dreams with the practiced attention of a therapist. He asked detailed questions about their sailing experience, their comfort level with maintenance and repairs, their plans for extended ocean passages. Most importantly, he seemed to understand the emotional significance of their purchase. This wasn't just buying a boat, it was buying a new life. "I have something special for you," Holloway told them during their third meeting. "She's not officially on the market yet, but I think she might be exactly what you're looking for." The yacht was a 2008 Hallberg-Rassy 62 named Serendipity. At 59 years old, David had read enough sailing magazines to know that Hallberg-Rassy yachts were considered the Mercedes-Benz of the sailing world. Swedish-built, conservatively designed, and engineered for safety above all else. The 62-foot model was particularly respected among serious cruisers, with a reputation for handling rough seas with grace and reliability. "The current owner is a cardiologist in San Francisco," Holloway explained, sliding a folder of photographs across his mahogany desk. "He commissioned her new in 2008, sailed her extensively for 5 years, then developed heart problems that ended his cruising days. She's been maintained by a professional crew ever since. Basically, a like-new yacht that's been properly broken in." The photographs were stunning. Serendipity's deep blue hull gleamed in the San Francisco sunshine, her bright white superstructure and teak decks, creating the classic aesthetic that had made Hallberg-Rassy famous worldwide. The interior photos revealed rich cherry woodwork, leather upholstery, and state-of-the-art electronics that would make navigation safer and more efficient. But it was the specifications that truly captured David's analytical mind. Serendipity was equipped with redundant systems for every critical function: 2 engines, 2 generators, 2 GPS systems, 2 autopilots. Her hull was solid fiberglass construction, nearly 3 inches thick at the waterline, designed to withstand collisions with floating debris or even minor groundings. She carried enough fuel and water for extended passages, had a watermaker capable of producing 15 gallons of fresh water per hour, and featured a comprehensive suite of safety equipment, including an 8-person life raft, EPIRB emergency beacon, and satellite communication system. "What's the asking price?" Sarah asked, though she was trying to hide her obvious excitement. $750,000, Holloway replied. "I know it sounds like a lot, but comparable yachts of this quality are selling for $900,000 or more. The owner is motivated. He wants to see her go to people who will actually use her for what she was designed for." David's spreadsheet analysis confirmed Holloway's assessment. Similar Hallberg-Rassy yachts were indeed selling for significantly higher prices, and finding one with Serendipity's maintenance history and equipment level would be nearly impossible. According to his research, they would need to spend at least another $100,000 upgrading a typical yacht to match Serendipity's current specifications. The sea trial was everything they had hoped for and more. On a crisp October day, with 15-knot winds in Puget Sound, Serendipity handled like a dream. Her motion through the water was smooth and predictable, her sails filled perfectly, and her steering was responsive without being twitchy. David, who had been nervous about handling such a large yacht, found himself relaxing at the helm as Serendipity seemed to sail herself. Sarah was enchanted by the yacht's interior spaces. The main salon was spacious enough for entertaining, but cozy enough to feel like home during long passages. The galley was equipped with everything she would need to prepare meals at sea, including gimbaled stoves that would remain level even when the yacht was heeled over in rough conditions. The navigation station featured chart plotters, weather routing software, and communication equipment that would keep them connected to the outside world, no matter how remote their anchorage. Most impressive was Serendipity's engine room, a spotless compartment where every system was clearly labeled, properly maintained, and easily accessible for routine service. The main engine, a Swedish Volvo Pentadiesel, showed only 200 hours of operation despite the yacht's 11-year age. The generator, water maker, and other mechanical systems appeared to be in similar condition. "She's been maintained by Alameda Marine Services," Holloway explained as they toured the engine room. "They're one of the most respected yacht maintenance companies on the West Coast. Every system has been serviced according to manufacturer specifications, and all the documentation is included." During the 3-hour sea trial, David tested every system aboard Serendipity. The autopilot held course perfectly in varying wind conditions. The GPS systems provided accurate positioning and navigation data. The radar and AIS systems clearly displayed other vessel traffic. Even the air conditioning and hot water heater functioned flawlessly. "It's like buying a luxury car that's been maintained by the dealer," Sarah observed as they returned to the marina. "Everything works exactly as it should." The survey process was equally reassuring. David hired 2 independent marine surveyors, one for the hull and structure, another for the mechanical and electrical systems. Both surveys came back with glowing reports. The hull showed no signs of osmotic blistering, impact damage, or structural problems. The deck hardware was properly sealed and showed no signs of leaking. The rigging was in excellent condition, with recent documentation of professional inspection and maintenance. The mechanical survey was equally positive. The engine showed excellent compression readings and no signs of overheating or abuse. The transmission, propeller shaft, and through-hull fittings were all in perfect condition. The electrical systems met or exceeded current safety standards, and the electronic equipment was functioning properly. "In 25 years of surveying yachts," the hull surveyor told David, "I've rarely seen a boat of this age in such pristine condition. Whoever owned this yacht really knew how to take care of her." The paperwork seemed equally solid. Holloway provided a complete maintenance history dating back to the yacht's delivery in 2008. Every oil change, every equipment upgrade, every routine service was documented with receipts and work orders. The Coast Guard documentation was current and showed a clean title with no liens or encumbrances. But it was a small detail in the documentation that should have raised questions, one that David's methodical nature would normally have caught. The yacht's Coast Guard documentation showed her name as Serendipity, with San Francisco as her hailing port. However, a careful examination of the hull would have revealed that the original name, Ocean Dreamer, had been painted over, though the ghost outline of the old letters was still faintly visible under certain lighting conditions. The insurance process moved smoothly. Holloway recommended a broker who specialized in blue water cruising yachts, and the insurance application was approved without any unusual requirements or exclusions. The survey reports satisfied the insurance company's requirements, and the premium was reasonable for a yacht of Serendipity's value and intended use. As closing day approached, David experienced the mixture of excitement and anxiety that accompanies any major purchase. He had spent countless hours researching every aspect of the transaction, but the enormity of spending their entire sailing budget on a single purchase was still overwhelming. Sarah, meanwhile, was already planning their first cruise, a shakedown voyage to the San Juan Islands, followed by a longer passage to Southern California. "Are we really doing this?" Sarah asked on the morning they were scheduled to sign the purchase agreement. 26 years we've been looking at that picture on the refrigerator," David replied, holding the weathered magazine clipping. "I think it's time to make it real." The closing took place at Holloway's office on a gray Seattle morning in November 2019. The process was remarkably smooth. Holloway had prepared all the documentation in advance, and the transaction required only signatures and a wire transfer of funds. The previous owner, Dr. Robert Chen, participated by phone from San Francisco, expressing genuine sadness about selling Serendipity, but pleasure that she was going to people who would use her for serious cruising. "Take good care of her," Dr. Chen said during the brief phone conversation. "She's been like a member of my family." As they walked down the dock toward their new yacht, David and Sarah experienced the surreal realization that their decades-long dream was finally becoming reality. Serendipity sat quietly at her slip, her lines perfectly arranged, her brightwork gleaming even in the overcast light. She looked exactly like the yacht in their refrigerator photo, sleek, capable, and ready for adventure. Their first months of ownership exceeded every expectation. They spent the winter months familiarizing themselves with every system aboard Serendipity, taking weekend trips around Puget Sound, and gradually building their confidence with the yacht's handling characteristics. They joined the local Hallberg-Rassy owners group and found themselves welcomed into a community of experienced cruisers who shared maintenance tips, recommended anchorages, and offered the kind of practical advice that only comes from real-world experience. In April 2020, they began their first extended cruise, a 2-month journey down the Pacific coast to Southern California. The passage was everything they had dreamed of and more. Serendipity handled the notorious conditions off Cape Mendocino with grace, her motion through the water remaining comfortable even in 12-foot seas. Her systems performed flawlessly throughout the journey, and by the time they reached San Diego, both David and Sarah felt completely confident in their yacht's capabilities and their own skills as offshore sailors. They spent the summer of 2020 cruising Southern California's Channel Islands, exploring anchorages that had been inaccessible to them during their previous land-based vacations. They swam with dolphins in crystal-clear water, watched whales migrate past their cockpit, and experienced the profound silence that can only be found miles from shore, with the engine turned off and the wind providing the only propulsion. "This is it," Sarah said one evening, as they watched the sunset from their anchorage at Santa Barbara Island. "This is the life we were meant to live." David agreed completely. After decades of conference rooms and computer screens, he had found something that engaged every part of his being: the physical challenge of sailing, the mental stimulation of navigation and weather routing, and the spiritual satisfaction of living in harmony with natural forces. Serendipity had exceeded their wildest expectations, proving herself to be exactly what Holloway had promised: a yacht capable of taking them safely anywhere in the world. By late 2020, they were ready for their first major offshore passage. They had planned a route from San Diego to the Marquesas Islands in French Polynesia, a 25-day passage that would test both their skills and their yacht systems under real blue water conditions. They spent months preparing for the voyage, studying weather patterns, planning their provisioning, and ensuring that every system aboard Serendipity was functioning perfectly. The departure from San Diego on March 15, 2021, was emotional. Their children had flown in to see them off, and the local sailing community had organized a small send-off party. As Serendipity motored out of San Diego Harbor in the pre-dawn darkness, David and Sarah felt the mixture of excitement and nervousness that accompanies every major life transition. The first 10 days of the passage were textbook perfect. Serendipity maintained a steady 7-knot average speed, her autopilot holding course reliably, while David and Sarah settled into their offshore watch schedule. The trade winds filled her sails consistently, and her motion through the water remained comfortable, even when the seas built to 8 feet. They were making better time than their conservative passage plan had projected, and both were gaining confidence in their ability to handle serious offshore sailing. On the 11th day, approximately 800 miles southwest of San Diego, they encountered their first real weather challenge: a developing low-pressure system that brought 30-knot winds and confused seas from multiple directions. It was exactly the kind of conditions that separate capable blue water yachts from coastal cruisers, and Serendipity handled the challenge admirably. Her heavy displacement hull cut through the waves rather than bouncing over them, and her conservative sail plan kept her moving efficiently without overpowering the steering. But it was during this weather system that David first noticed something that would later prove to be significant. While checking the engine room during his evening inspection routine, he observed a small amount of water in the bilge, not enough to trigger the automatic bilge pump, but more than he had ever seen during their coastal cruising. When he mentioned it to Sarah, she suggested it might be spray coming through the cockpit drains, or possibly condensation from the temperature differential between the cool ocean water and their heated interior. David's engineering background made him naturally suspicious of any unexpected changes in the yacht's systems, but his inspection revealed no obvious source for the water. The through-hull fittings appeared tight and dry, the shaft-packing gland showed no signs of leaking, and there were no visible cracks or damage to the hull. After pumping out the small amount of water and monitoring the bilge for the next 24 hours, he convinced himself that Sarah's explanation was probably correct. The weather system passed, and the remainder of their passage to the Marquesas proceeded normally. They made landfall at Nuku Hiva after 23 days at sea, 2 days ahead of their projected arrival. The sense of accomplishment was overwhelming. They had successfully completed their first major ocean passage, and Serendipity had performed exactly as her reputation suggested she would. They spent 3 months cruising French Polynesia, visiting remote atolls and experiencing the kind of pristine natural beauty that had motivated their sailing dreams in the first place. Serendipity's shallow draft allowed them to anchor in lagoons where larger yachts couldn't go, and her reliable systems let them stay at anchor for weeks without needing to return to port for supplies or maintenance. It was in Tahiti, while having Serendipity hauled out for routine bottom maintenance, that a local boatyard worker made a casual observation that should have raised serious questions. While pressure washing the hull, he noticed that the fairing compound along the keel showed some discoloration and what appeared to be minor stress cracks. When David asked about it, the worker shrugged and suggested that it might be normal aging of the fairing materials. But the worker's observation prompted David to take a closer look at the yacht's underwater appendages. What he saw troubled his engineering instincts. The fairing compound around the keel joint showed patterns that weren't consistent with normal thermal expansion and contraction. The cracks appeared to follow specific stress lines, as if the keel had experienced forces that exceeded the original design parameters. David photographed the area and sent the images to a marine surveyor in California, explaining his concerns. The surveyor's response was reassuring. Stress cracks in fairing compound were common on yachts of Serendipity's age, and the patterns didn't appear to indicate any structural problems. The surveyor recommended monitoring the situation and having a more detailed inspection performed during their next haul-out, but saw no immediate cause for concern. Reassured by the professional opinion, David authorized the boatyard to fair and repaint the affected areas. The work was completed professionally, and when Serendipity was relaunched, her underwater surfaces looked like new. The minor bilge water issue that had occurred during their Pacific crossing seemed to have resolved itself completely. David's daily inspections showed consistently dry bilges throughout their time in French Polynesia. Their second major passage, from Tahiti to New Zealand, was planned for September 2021 to take advantage of favorable weather patterns. This passage would be more challenging than their Pacific crossing. Longer duration, more potential weather systems, and arrival during New Zealand's spring season, when conditions could be unpredictable. The passage started perfectly. Serendipity departed Papeete in ideal conditions, and the first week at sea was everything they had hoped for. Steady trade winds, comfortable seas, and their yacht's familiar, reassuring motion through the water. They were averaging over 150 nautical miles per day, putting them ahead of their conservative passage plan. It was during the second week, approximately halfway between Tahiti and New Zealand, that their dream began turning into a nightmare. David was on watch during the early morning hours when he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. A deep, resonant crack that seemed to come from somewhere within the yacht structure itself. It wasn't the familiar creaking of rigging under load or the normal working sounds of a yacht at sea. This was something different, something wrong. His immediate inspection of the interior revealed nothing obvious. All systems appeared to be functioning normally, and there were no visible cracks or damage in the cabin sole, bulkheads, or overhead. But when he checked the engine room, his heart stopped. The bilge, which had been consistently dry for months, now contained several inches of water, far more than any bilge pump cycle could have removed. David immediately woke Sarah and activated their emergency protocols. While she took the helm and began monitoring their position and weather conditions, David conducted a systematic inspection of every through-hull fitting, seacock, and potential source of water intrusion. What he found defied explanation. There was no obvious source for the water entering their yacht. The bilge pump was working properly and seemed to be keeping up with the inflow, but the fact that water was entering their supposedly sound hull at all was deeply troubling. David's engineering training told him that they needed to find the source immediately, because any leak that was getting worse could quickly become life-threatening in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Using a flashlight and mirror, David systematically examined every accessible part of the hull interior. It was during this inspection that he made a discovery that would have been impossible to detect during their pre-purchase survey. hidden behind a furniture panel that could only be removed with the yacht completely empty of personal belongings, he found evidence of what appeared to be a previous repair to the hull. The repair was professionally done, so professionally that it would have been invisible to any normal inspection. But the stress patterns in the surrounding fiberglass suggested that this area of the hull had experienced significant trauma at some point in the yacht's history. More disturbing, the repair appeared to be failing, with small cracks appearing in the gel coat around the edges of the repaired area. David immediately contacted their insurance company via satellite phone, explaining the situation and requesting guidance. The insurance company advised them to make for the nearest port immediately and arranged for an emergency survey to be conducted as soon as they reached safe harbor. But reaching safe harbor was going to be a challenge. Their position put them more than 1,000 miles from the nearest port, and the weather forecast showed a developing storm system that could bring dangerous conditions within 48 hours. David calculated that even if Serendipity's leak didn't get worse, they would need at least 5 days to reach New Zealand, assuming optimal conditions. As if sensing their predicament, the leak began to worsen. The bilge pump, which had initially been cycling every 30 minutes, was now running every 15 minutes. David rigged a manual backup pump and established a watch schedule that ensured someone was monitoring the bilge situation every hour, 24 hours per day. The developing storm system caught up with them 3 days later, bringing 40-knot winds and 15-foot seas. Under normal circumstances, Serendipity would have handled such conditions easily. But with a compromised hull and increasing water intrusion, every wave that struck their yacht threatened to worsen their situation. It was during the height of the storm that David heard the sound again, the deep, structural crack that had first alerted him to their problem. This time the sound was followed by an immediate and dramatic increase in the rate of water intrusion. The bilge pump, which had been keeping up with the leak, suddenly couldn't cycle fast enough to prevent water from rising in the engine room. David activated their emergency beacon and began broadcasting mayday calls on their VHF and SSB radios. Their position, more than 600 miles northeast of New Zealand, put them at the extreme edge of search and rescue capabilities. The nearest commercial shipping was more than 200 miles away, and the weather conditions made any rescue attempt extremely dangerous. As water continued to rise in the engine room, despite continuous pumping, David and Sarah began preparing their life raft and emergency supplies. They gathered their important documents, emergency food and water, and survival equipment, while monitoring their yacht's increasingly desperate situation. The final catastrophic failure occurred just after midnight on September 23, 2021. A section of the hull repair, weakened by days of working in heavy seas, finally gave way completely. Water began pouring into Serendipity's interior faster than any pump could handle. Within minutes, it became clear that their yacht was going to sink. David and Sarah activated their life raft and transmitted their final position via GPS beacon. As they watched Serendipity's stern settle lower in the water, they experienced the surreal nightmare of seeing their dream, their home, and their security disappearing beneath the Pacific swell. They were rescued 36 hours later by a New Zealand Navy vessel that had diverted from exercises to respond to their emergency beacon. Both survived the ordeal physically unharmed, but their savings, their yacht, and their dreams were gone forever. The investigation that followed would reveal the full scope of the deception that had cost them everything. The yacht they knew as Serendipity had indeed begun life as a 2008 Hallberg Rassi 62, but her original name had been Ocean Dreamer, and her history was far more complex and troubling than Marcus Holloway had revealed. In December 2009, just 18 months after her delivery, Ocean Dreamer had been involved in a collision with a commercial vessel in San Francisco Bay. The collision had caused significant damage to her portside, including a breach in the hull that had allowed thousands of gallons of water to enter the yacht before she could be salvaged. The damage had been severe enough to total the yacht, according to her original insurance company. However, rather than being scrapped, Ocean Dreamer had been purchased by a salvage company and sold to a yacht repair facility that specialized in rebuilding damaged vessels. The repair work had been extensive and expensive, including replacement of significant portions of the hull structure, but it had not been performed to the original manufacturer's standards. Cost-cutting measures had resulted in repairs that looked perfect cosmetically, but lacked the structural integrity of the original construction. The repaired yacht had been renamed Serendipity and sold to Dr. Robert Chen, who had used her extensively for coastal cruising but had never subjected her to the stresses of serious offshore sailing. Dr. Chen had been completely unaware of the yacht's accident history. He had purchased her through the same broker, Marcus Holloway, who had represented her as a pristine, never-damaged vessel. The most shocking revelation was that Marcus Holloway had known about the yacht's history all along. Financial pressures from his failing brokerage business had motivated him to conceal the accident and repair history, knowing that full disclosure would have made the yacht impossible to sell at anywhere near her apparent market value. He had forged documents, bribed a surveyor to provide false inspection reports, and created an entirely fictitious maintenance history to support the deception. Dr. Chen, when contacted by investigators, was horrified to learn the truth about the yacht he had owned for more than a decade. He had been planning to take Serendipity on her first major offshore passage when his heart problems had forced him to sell. Had he attempted such a voyage, he likely would have experienced the same catastrophic hull failure that had nearly killed the Mitchells. The forged survey reports had been particularly sophisticated. Holloway had paid a corrupt marine surveyor to provide false documentation showing that the hull repairs had been properly inspected and found to be structurally sound. The surveyor had never actually examined the yacht. He had simply created fictional reports based on photographs and specifications provided by Holloway. The insurance fraud was equally elaborate. Holloway had worked with an accomplice in the insurance industry to ensure that Serendipity's history would not appear in standard database searches that might have revealed her previous total loss status. This required falsifying Coast Guard documentation, creating backdated repair records, and establishing a false chain of ownership that hid the yacht's true identity. The Coast Guard investigation concluded that the hull failure that had nearly killed David and Sarah Mitchell was entirely predictable. The substandard repairs performed after the 2009 collision had created stress concentrations that would inevitably fail under the loads imposed by serious offshore sailing. The yacht had essentially been a ticking time bomb, waiting for conditions severe enough to expose the weakness in her structure. Marcus Holloway was eventually arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including fraud, conspiracy, and endangering human life. His trial revealed the full extent of his deception. Serendipity was not his only fraudulent sale. Over a period of 5 years, financial pressures had driven him to sell several damaged yachts to unsuspecting buyers, concealing accident histories and structural problems that made the vessels unsafe for their intended use. The corrupt surveyor received a federal prison sentence and lost his professional certifications. Dr. Chen, though a victim himself, faced civil lawsuits from other buyers who had purchased yachts based on his apparent ownership history with the fraudulent vessel. But for David and Sarah Mitchell, the legal resolution provided little comfort. Their life savings were gone. Their dreams had literally sunk beneath the Pacific swells, and they had experienced a trauma that would affect them for the rest of their lives. The insurance payout covered only a fraction of their losses, and their age made it impossible to restart the financial accumulation that had taken them decades to achieve. The psychological impact was equally devastating. David, whose methodical approach to research had failed to protect them from Holloway's deception, questioned every decision and became paralyzed by self-doubt. Sarah, who had felt so connected to the ocean during their sailing adventures, could no longer bear to be near the water. The sound of waves or even the sight of sailboats triggered panic attacks that reminded her of those terrifying hours in the life raft. Their story became a cautionary tale within the sailing community, shared in marina bars and yacht club meetings as a reminder that even the most careful buyers could become victims of sophisticated fraud. Yacht brokers began requiring more extensive documentation of vessel histories, surveyors implemented new protocols for detecting hidden damage, and insurance companies developed better databases for tracking vessels with accident histories. The technical lessons from the Serendipity disaster were equally important. Marine engineers studied the failure patterns and developed new techniques for detecting substandard repairs that might not be visible during standard surveys. The Hallberg-Rassy factory issued technical bulletins to help owners and surveyors identify structural repairs that might compromise the integrity of their yachts. But perhaps the most important lesson was about trust in an industry that had traditionally operated on handshakes and personal relationships. The sailing community had always prided itself on honesty and mutual support, sailors helping sailors, regardless of competition or commercial interests. Marcus Holloway's betrayal of that trust represented something more than simple fraud. It was an assault on the values that made the sailing community special. The broader implications extended beyond sailing to any high-value purchase, where buyers must rely on expert advice and professional integrity. Real estate, classic cars, art, any market where authenticity and condition are crucial factors, became aware of the techniques Holloway had used to deceive his clients. Today, David Mitchell works as a consultant, helping other boat buyers avoid the mistakes that cost him everything. His systematic approach to research, the same methodical nature that had initially failed to protect him from Holloway's sophisticated deception, now serves to help others navigate the complex process of yacht purchasing safely. Sarah never sailed again. The ocean that had once been her spiritual home became a source of trauma and anxiety. But she found new purpose in marine conservation work, using her scientific background to protect the ocean environments that had given her such joy during their brief time aboard Serendipity. Their refrigerator no longer displays a picture of a dream yacht cutting through tropical waters. Instead, they keep a photo from their rescue, two exhausted people being helped aboard a New Zealand Navy vessel, alive but having lost everything they had worked their entire lives to achieve. The lesson of Serendipity isn't just about the importance of thorough inspections or the need to verify a broker's integrity. It's a reminder that dreams built on deception, no matter how beautiful they appear, carry within them the seeds of their own destruction. In the end, Marcus Holloway's lie didn't just cost David and Sarah Mitchell their money, it nearly cost them their lives, and it definitely cost them the future they had spent 26 years imagining. The Pacific Ocean keeps its secrets, but the wreckage of Serendipity, somewhere in the deep waters northeast of New Zealand, serves as a permanent monument to the price of misplaced trust and the devastating consequences when those we depend on choose greed over integrity. For every sailor who dreams of blue water cruising, the story of the Mitchells serves as a sobering reminder that in a world where lives depend on the strength of hulls and the truth of those who sell them, a single lie can be the difference between adventure and tragedy. The sailing world learned from their loss, but for David and Sarah Mitchell, the knowledge came too late to save their dreams. Their story continues to echo through yacht clubs and sailing forums as proof that even the most beautiful vessels can hide deadly secrets, and that the greatest danger to sailors may not come from storms at sea, but from the lies told in comfortable offices ashore.